Ever wonder why you see the world the way you do? Or why you can't get that one song out of your head? Well, those aren't just random quirks of being human. They're actually clues, little breadcrumbs leading to the inner workings of your mind. In this explainer, we're going to go on a quick journey through psychology, the science that's all about figuring out why we think, feel, and act the way we do. Okay, let's jump right in. Take a look at this. It's called a Necker cube. Now, it's just a bunch of lines on a flat surface, right? But your brain, it absolutely insists on seeing a 3D cube. Keep looking at it. See that? It flips. One second you see it from above, the next you're looking up at it from below. Your brain just can't settle on one view because it's actively trying to solve this visual puzzle. This simple illusion tells you something huge about your mind. You're not just passively watching reality like a movie, you are an active creator of it. And that process of creation, well, that's what psychology is all about. Over 100 years ago, a brilliant psychologist named William James called his field the science of mental life. Now, think about that for a second. He was saying we could take our most private, internal experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, and actually study them with scientific rigor. It was a pretty revolutionary idea at the time, and it's really the foundation for everything we're going to talk about. But how do you go from just thinking about your own thoughts to a real hard science? Well, our first stop is to look at how psychology grew up and how it learned to tell the difference between a real fact and just, an opinion. It all started with something called introspection, which basically meant psychologists just thought about their own thoughts. But as you can imagine, that wasn't super reliable. So the pendulum swung way over to behaviorism, which said if you can't see it and measure it, it doesn't count as science. Suddenly, the mind itself became this black box that was totally off limits. But ignoring the mind is kind of like trying to understand a car by only looking at its tires. It just doesn't work. So around the middle of the 1900s, the cognitive revolution kicked off. Scientists got new tools and designed clever experiments to finally start picking the lock on that black box, eager to see what was really going on inside. All right, so now that we know how psychology became a science, let's get into the good stuff. What has it actually taught us about how your mind works? How do you make sense of the world, hang on to memories, and tackle problems? Let's get into the building blocks of how you know what you know. So your brain is doing two incredible things all the time at once. First, there's bottom-up processing. That's just your senses gathering raw data, light hitting your eyes, sound waves hitting your ears. But then there's top-down processing, which is your brain using everything it already knows and expects to make sense of that raw data. So your ears might hear a jumble of notes, that's bottom-up, but your brain recognizes it as your favorite song, that's top-down. And what you actually experience is a totally seamless blend of both. Okay, quick. Take a look at the phrase on the screen. Did you see the mistake? Most people don't notice the extra "the" right away. That is a perfect example of your top-down processing in action. Your brain is so good at predicting what should be there based on experience that it literally just corrects reality for you. Kind of makes you wonder, right? How often do our expectations change what we see without us even knowing it? And this whole idea of your brain actively building things, well, it applies to your past too. We tend to think of our memory like a perfect video camera, just replaying events exactly as they happened. But what psychology has found is that memory is actually a process of reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're not just hitting play, you're rebuilding that memory from scratch. And sometimes you might even change a few details to make the story make more sense to you today. This was shown so brilliantly in a classic study where participants read a pretty strange Native American legend. When they were asked to retell the story later, they'd unconsciously changed it. Weird details like something black came out of his mouth were remembered as something more familiar, like he foamed at the mouth. Now, they weren't lying. Their minds were just automatically editing the memory to make it fit with what they already understood about the world. So how does any experience go from just a fleeting moment to a memory you keep for life? Well, you can think of it like a three-stage filing system. First, there's the sensory store. It's like a chaotic inbox, holding on to everything for just a split second. If you decide to pay attention to something, it moves to the short-term store. That's like your brain's desktop, where you can juggle about 7 things at once. And if something is important enough, it gets filed away in the long-term store, this huge, vast archive where it can stick around pretty much forever. All right, let's put that mind of yours to the test. Here's a famous puzzle. The challenge is to connect all 9 of these dots using only 4 straight lines, and you can't lift your pen off the paper. Go ahead, pause this, and really give it a try. It's a classic for a reason. It's way harder than it looks, and the solution shows us a common mental trap we all fall into. So what's the trick? Well, you have to draw outside the lines, literally. See, most of us just assume we have to stay inside the imaginary box that the dots make, but that rule doesn't actually exist. We made it up. This is a perfect example of what psychologists call a mental set. We get stuck trying to solve problems in a way that worked before. In this case, our brain sees a square and creates an invisible fence that stops us from finding the simple, creative answer that's waiting just outside the box. So, we've seen a little bit about how the mind works. Now let's switch gears and talk about the why. What are the powerful forces, the motivations, and the emotions that actually drive us to do what we do? One of the most famous ideas here is Maslow's hierarchy. It basically says our motivations are stacked like a pyramid. At the bottom, you have the absolute basics for survival: food, water, safety. And the theory goes that you can't really focus on the higher level stuff like belonging or accomplishment or reaching your full potential until those foundational needs are met. It's a powerful way to think about how our life circumstances really shape what drives us from one day to the next. Now, what's so interesting here is how much our conscious goals can push us. In this study, telling woodcutters to just do your best actually got the worst results. But when they were given a specific, hard goal, their performance shot up. And when they got to set that hard goal themselves, even better. The lesson here is incredibly practical. If you want to get something done, do your best just isn't enough. Setting a specific, challenging goal is a scientifically proven way to get results. So what about emotions? They feel so automatic, right? But the two-factor theory says that feeling an emotion is actually a two-step process. First, you need the raw physical feeling, a racing heart, sweaty palms, that kind of thing. But that physical jolt isn't enough on its own. You also need a cognitive label, a thought that gives that feeling a name. And as we're about to see, the label you pick can change everything. This experiment is just wild. Researchers gave people a shot of adrenaline but didn't tell them what it was. Then they had them wait in a room with an actor who was either acting super happy or really, really angry. The results were incredible. The people started to feel the emotion that the actor was performing. Now think about that. The exact same physical feeling, a racing heart from adrenaline, was interpreted as either pure joy or intense anger, all because of the social situation they were in. It's an amazing demonstration of how our thoughts and our environment literally create our emotional reality. Okay, for our last section, let's zoom all the way out and look at the biggest picture of all, how we grow and change, not just from day to day, but over the course of our entire lives. You've probably heard of the big debate, nature versus nurture. Are we who we are because of our genes or because of our experiences? Well, the modern view in psychology is that it's not a battle, it's a partnership. Think of it this way. Nature gives a plant the genetic blueprint, but it's nurture, the sun, the soil, the water, that determines how tall that plant actually grows. And it's the same for us. Our potential is unlocked by our experiences. And one of the most critical pieces of that nurture happens in our very first relationships. Attachment theory tells us that the emotional bond we form with our caregivers gives us a secure base, a safe harbor from which we can go out and explore the world. This early bond is so powerful that it can actually create a kind of blueprint for all of our future relationships, with friends, with partners, even with our own kids. But what's that bond really all about? Is it just about who feeds you? Well, Harry Harlow's famous experiments with monkeys gave us a jaw-dropping answer. He gave baby monkeys two fake mothers. One was made of cold, hard wire but had a bottle of milk, and the other was covered in soft, cuddly cloth but had no food. The baby monkeys spent almost all of their time clinging to the soft cloth mother. The results were revolutionary. They show that attachment isn't just about survival, it's about comfort. That deep need for warmth and security is a fundamental part of who we are, even more powerful than the drive for food. In this process of development, it doesn't just stop when we're kids. Thinkers like Erik Erikson showed us that our whole life is a journey, with each stage bringing a new psychological challenge we have to navigate. From learning to trust the world as a baby, to figuring out who you are as a teenager, to finding a sense of purpose in adulthood, and looking back on your life with integrity, we are always, always in the process of becoming. So we've seen that what you perceive is a construction your brain builds. What you remember is a reconstruction of the past. And what you feel depends on your interpretation of the moment. Which leaves us with one last big question. If all of that is true, then who is the architect of your experience?